One of the odd reactions to come out of the US presidential election, could I say, the US election, and it's obviously carried by Stuff, which is, sort of one of the odd mainstream media of this country, but well, there you go. Is that for some women in the United States, apparently the election on Tuesday was a referendum on women's rights and reproductive freedom. All right, you would have heard all that. That was probably one of the reasons they lost, but it doesn't matter. And so now these women, or a certain group of them anyhow, have embraced a South Korean feminist movement. Oh, it's too good. Called 4B. And the 4B movement basically says, I am not going to have anything to do with men. All right? It's called the 4B movement because B is shorthand for the word no in Korean. And essentially, a whole series of young women in the United States of America have joined the 4B movement because at the end of the day, they see men as the reason why Donald Trump won, and they want to punish men. So apparently this 4B movement's gone mad in the United States, particularly, and as you'd expect, on university campuses, and certainly the more liberal ones. But joining us to talk about the US election, the reaction to it, what it's likely to mean for us, and the other events of the week, Shane Jones, the Associate Energy Minister, joins us now. Shane, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on. I guess you won't be joining the 4B movement anytime quickly?
Kia ora, mate. If there's any epitome that explains why Trump has won, it's that type of occurrence.
Yes.
And of course, we have the same culture in New Zealand, where corporate New Zealand, the political class, and indeed the education Pharisees place greater accent on what pronoun you use rather than the deep, earthy issues that dominate the lives of garden variety Kiwis, which is why the closest party in New Zealand.
Oops. Tim. Okay, Shane's just dropped out. We'll go and grab him back then. All right, we'll go and grab Shane back. Yes, so that's about some of the more extreme reaction in the United States of America. But one of the themes that's coming out, even in the New York Times today, the narrative is that Kamala Harris failed to win the US presidency essentially because she was a woman. All right, Shane's back again. Listen, Shane, did you... I thought it was my popcorn moment of the year, so I just sat down on a lovely afternoon in central Otago and watched the results come in. What were you doing at the time?
Well, we were in the Speaker's office drinking gin, watching the results.
Good on you.
My wife had already predicted it, but look, the point I'm making is that when you have a political culture that places greater accent on pronouns than the day-to-day travails of garden variety Kiwis, which is basically what's even happening in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised when the masses turn out and say, bugger that, we're not going to tolerate this consensus any longer because it not only cancels us, but it marginalises us.
Yeah, I thought old-fashioned socialist Bernie Sanders summed it up quite well this week when he said, well, if you're going to ignore the working class of this country, don't be surprised if the working class of the country ignore you, when he was blaming the emphasis upon identity politics over stuff that really affected people, bread and butter issues, can I afford to feed my kids, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Sure, when I've got disposable income, then whether or not the entry on a birth certificate, whether it's mum, dad, parent, or some other variation, then I've got the time because I can make a choice to use my resources in that fanciful way. But if you're not in that situation, then you're going to look askance at the shrillness associated and the catastrophization associated with so-called women's rights, with the rights of families to continue to survive and prosper is compromised by these marginal issues. That's why he's the President of the United States of America.
That's right. But that's the United States of America. We've got the same identity politics and culture wars playing out here too, Shane. Are New Zealanders as disenfranchised, disheartened with the elites as the American people?
I think what the Kiwis have lacked is a clear home And that's why I said at the beginning of this interview, I'd say of all the political parties, it's New Zealand First that probably reflects a range of the influences and priorities that resonate with a lot of the Trump voters. Yeah, but those voters aren't just dislocated white men. They were blacks, they were Latinos, they were rural, they were regional, and it's a coalition of repudiating the power of elites, the cancellation, censoring style of elite culture, to the point that even the banks today, they'll bank a prostitution business, but they won't bank a coal business. That's the wokeism that Trump is going to put to the sword.
Okay, but that's
and
good,
by the mind, by the way, I don't give I couldn't give a hoot if they bank a prostitution business. I really don't care.
No, but I understand your concern. Listen, just talking about that, though, if you are the group of the people, yesterday the Treaty Principles Bill was introduced into the House. I'm bemused, not amused, bemused by New Zealand First not voting for it. Can you please explain the position of New Zealand First on the Treaty Principles Bill? I know you're not going to vote for it, you've said that, but why?
Well, number one, we don't even believe that there are principles of the treaty. That's the first thing. Winston's been consistently, and you in particular know this. Secondly, why would you pass a new bill and hand over to the Supreme Court a fresh opportunity to make New Zealand colonial, political, social history and future in a mirror image of their minds? I mean, who do you think is going to breathe life into this new distillation of the principles? It's the court system.
Okay,
I think that the court system is going to interpret it in the way in which the ACT Party believe it will? You're dreaming.
No, but carry on that logic for a second, though. Okay, so really, if there are no principles to the Treaty of Waitangi, it's in legislation as it stands at the moment. What, 20-odd pieces of legislation?
54.
54, is it? Wow, yeah, there you go. And critical legislation as well to this country's future. If you're not going to interpret what those principles are, and at the moment the courts and public servants seem to have the greatest sway on that issue, then surely you've got to take out all references to the principles of the treaty from those 54 pieces of legislation.
And then you've obviously read the coalition agreement. You've obviously read our manifesto. What we campaigned on is grossly reducing all references in law to the principles of Treaty of Waitangi, or where they remain, define what they mean with huge specificity.
Does that mean taking it out of existing legislation or legislation that you're going to...
That's what we campaigned on. No.
Okay, you might have campaigned on that, but what pieces of legislation are you thinking New Zealand First will be sitting around the cabinet table and say, I'll run that out of that particular bill? What sort of acts are you talking about, Shane?
So we're certainly start with the DOC Act. I mean, today we read that the Ruapehu Turo ski field owners can't get a permit, largely because they forgot to get the right permit, but they can't get it, and they have to go through a constipated process because Section 4 of the Treaty of Waitangi, which doesn't give Hapu a veto, requires DOC to go through this inordinately long, convoluted process.
I'm assuming you're talking about the Conservation Act of 1987, is that?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about Section 4 of the Conservation Act 1987, which is, to be honest, mate, it's encrusted. It's grown largely through court interpretations, and then I guess the judges will say, well, no one told us what it meant, so you left us to define it within the context. We have in our work program, the government's work program, we have in our coalition agreement, and we see at the end of 2 or 3 years that is a way of having shrunk the spread of these existing principles.